So far, as I've been preparing to preach, I've been asking two really important questions of my text, which is 1 John 1, 1 to 4, as I begin a series of sermons working through this letter. The first question is, what is God saying? And I find that in the flesh of the text. And then I've been asking, how is God saying it? And I find that in the skeleton of the passage. And the next critical stage, as I prepare, and remember, I'm still at this point purely focusing on the text I'm going to preach from. My goal here is to discover the heart of that scriptural passage. As you can see, I'm continuing my analogy of the body, working in from the flesh to the skeleton to the heart. And the question I now ask, as I continue to probe and dig into this passage of scripture, is why is God saying what he says? Now, the point I'm trying to make over and over again, because it's almost impossible to overstress it, is until I'm sure about the what and the how and the why, I dare not attempt to preach. I know from talking to other preachers that many of them, just like me, have had that unnerving experience of being in full flow, preaching on a Sunday morning, giving their all, confident that the message they are bringing is well constructed, follows all the principles of good exegesis and exposition, only to discover, suddenly to realize in midstream that they had actually missed the author's point. Maybe you've had the experience of sitting listening to a preacher and thinking to yourself, he's missed the point. Well, what I've learned along the way is this: I mustn't try and prepare my sermon, let alone preach my sermon, until I'm absolutely clear on what is the heart of the text I am preaching from. You see, every text, every expository unit of scripture has one main theme or meaning, though it may have several applications. There will be one unit of thought that binds it together and gives meaning to all the details of the text. Different preachers call this by different names: the focal point, the big idea, or the central proposition of the text. I simply call it the MTH, the main theme. And every single sermon should have just one main idea. One writer puts it like this: every sermon should have a theme, and that theme should be the theme of the portion of scripture on which it is based. The great Haddon Robinson, who was so influential in this particular aspect, said, quote, "Each sermon is the explanation, interpretation, or application of a single dominant idea supported by other ideas, all drawn from one passage or several passages of scripture." And the reason why this is so important is because my task as a preacher is to convey the meaning and message intended by the original author. So this next stage is where I work out the heart of the text, the MTH, and then formulate a single statement which crystallizes and distills that theme, and from which my sermon will develop and take shape. Now, I ought to say, and I haven't made much of this so far, I do want to underline that all of this work at every stage of the process has to be bathed in and saturated with prayer. Prayer that God would lead me and guide me and help me to see what is there in the inspired text of Scripture that I need to bring out in my sermon. Now, as I engage with this stage of finding the heart, there are two things I need to do. First, I find the heart of the passage, and then I formulate it. Let me explain that and show you how I've just done that with the first 4 verses of 1 John. And again, here's the golden rule for finding the heart of the text. Identify the heart, don't impose it. Now, there are different steps I can take to identify the heart, to find out what is the heartbeat of this passage of scripture. I could look at the outline. I could build on the work I did in stage 3, where I looked for and found the structure, the bones of the text. And you may remember that in this passage, I found 3 big bones and the number of smaller bones. Working with the big bones will help me to identify the heart of the passage. Sometimes a passage will contain a single statement that, on prayer and reflection, will prove to be the heart of the passage. But I haven't found that to be the case in these 4 verses. Often it comes from repeated words or ideas, and that's certainly a key factor in these verses. We've got the word seemed 3 times, the word heard twice, proclaim comes twice, fellowship comes twice, life occurs 3 times. But fourthly, we must never forget the wider context of the section we're working on, which is why I took time at the beginning of my whole preparation process to get familiar with the whole of 1 John. I need to check whether my conclusions about 1 to 4 are in keeping with what I discovered about the thrust of the whole letter. So having worked on and thought about and prayed over this much in the last couple of days, I've come to the conclusion that the heart of these 4 verses is the fact that Christ, the eternal word of life, has become incarnate and was manifest to the early apostles, of whom John, of course, was one. That they were eyewitnesses of his life and ministry, and they went on to proclaim it to us so that we might enjoy fellowship with them in the Father and the Son. So having identified the heart, I now need to formulate it. I want to craft it into a single propositional statement that will be the foundation for the rest of my sermon preparation, because the summary I've just given you a moment or 2 back is too big and bulky for that purpose. John MacArthur helpfully puts it like this. He says, once I have found it, the main expositional idea, I write it out in a complete sentence because it is crucial that the main idea of the passage be clear in my own mind. This becomes the target I aim for in the exposition. It's also the primary message I want my people to retain after they hear the sermon. So this one statement or sentence is going to be the roadmap along which the rest of my preparation will travel to make sure I'm on the right road. I'm going to keep it before me through the rest of my preparation. And if necessary, yes, I'll improve it and sharpen it up as I discover any weaknesses in it. And I want this statement that I'm going to craft and formulate about the heart of the passage to clearly reflect both the truth of the passage, but also the totality of the passage. It needs to distill in a single statement or proposition the whole of which the big bones, the main points, are a part. But let me also just point out here that I'm not here crafting the title of my sermon. I'm still on the text. I'm crafting a summary that expresses the heart of the passage. Now, it's possible that will become the title of my sermon, but that's not my intention at this moment in time. And ultimately, the title of my sermon must be clearly seen to be connected with this summary statement of the passage. But I'm crafting a statement that sums up the passage here, not a sermon title. So here's where I am at so far in this process. Here's my roadmap, my propositional statement, which at this moment in time, I think sums up the truth and totality of 1 John 1, 1 to 4. The apostles were eyewitnesses of the life and ministry of Jesus, the eternal word of life, and proclaimed that testimony to us so that we might with them share in the fellowship of God and his Son, and so experience real joy. Now, I'll admit that's still a bit long, and I'm going to continue to work on it, but there's so much in these 4 verses that's really hard to make it much briefer.